waiting for the snap, the put down, the kick is up, and it is good! It is good! The Bills have won it in overtime! They win the division championship! And this place is bedlam! It is bedlam!
Thanks for tuning in to If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo podcast on the Overreaction Sports Network powered by The League. And now your hosts, former Director of Football Administration for the Buffalo Bills, Don Purdy, and former Coaching Assistant for the Buffalo Bills, Josh Cormier.
All right, thank you.
Welcome to If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo. Don, how you doing?
Doing great. Yourself, Josh?
I'm great. We got a fun kind of off-the-board show today, but before anything else, we will start with our opening drive, where I asked Don 3 random Bills of the past 35 years and get a 30-second or less thoughts on them. Thanks. Shout out to my guy, Anthony, at David Adams Card World for the names this week. Don, you ready?
I think so. What if they're on our later list? We'll make that adjustment if it happens.
Yeah. All right. Number 1, Thad Lewis. Go.
Thad Lewis. Boy, he had one shot at playing quarterback. He was a third-string quarterback, and I believe he was the starter for us when we played the Bengals before we went to London.
Was there any thought that, hey, if this guy might work out?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know how great he would have had to do to.
Sure.
But again, those years, I think that was with the Tyrod Taylor years, and he was he was the guy.
All right, second guy on the list. You just mentioned him, Tyrod Taylor.
Okay. When we acquired him, he was, I think, third string for the Ravens, and everyone said he could run and all this, but I don't feel like anyone really thought that he would compete for the starting job.
Was his contract structured like a starter or no?
No, it had incentives that, if he took off, it would benefit him. But even if he reached the moon, he wouldn't have, capitalized like someone that should have. But, there was a buzz around the building like, man, this guy might be the guy. And because EJ Manuel was still there, obviously the first round pick, but nobody cared. It was like, if he can play, we have somebody that can play. But he was kind of a shy player. I was pleasantly surprised to see that he was still doing so well in the league with the Giants last year against the Bills.
Still in the league.
Yeah. So,
all right, third guy on our list, Sammy Watkins.
Wow. Okay.
I know. 30 seconds. We'll revisit him in another time.
Well, obviously the first instinct is that when he was drafted, the room went crazy. There was a trade.
Any
for
trepidation
him.
from you? Any trepidation? Man, we gave up a lot for a receiver.
Yeah, but I trusted Doug Whaley that the guy was special, and all indications were when he started practicing, like, oh man, he catches everything and he's going to be a star. He was going to be worth the whatever we traded for him, which was a lot. And
2 firsts, basically.
Two firsts, yeah. And there are still guys in the league from that draft class that are playing. Right. So, yeah.
All right. That was our opening drive. Thank you, Don. We're going to move on here, and we got kind of a fun format here. If you followed us before on If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo, we did a lot of lists of the greatest and the most interesting players by position and kind of our thoughts and reactions to guys over the past 35 years. Don started with the Bills in 1988 as an intern and was director of football administration all the way to 2017. And I was there for a fast, bright, almost 5 years from 97 to 2001. Flew a little too close to the sun. But today, I tasked Don with him and I coming up with 10 interesting personalities in the Bills history. I'll call it recent Bills history from 88 through today. Sure. And we're just going to kind of throw them at each other and play a little bit of spitball. They're not the 20 greatest players. They're not the 20 best players. I don't even know if they're the 20 most interesting players. But they're our picks for guys that we thought would be a fun topic. And then we're going to throw it to our audience going forward and have this being kind of a recurring conversation where you guys please pick some players that you want, Don's thoughts on, my thoughts on, memories, recollections of, throughout those years. So Don, without further ado, pick number one. And this is in no particular order. This is not first round, second round, third round, but you start us off. We're going to try to limit this to like a minute and a half per person. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sounds good. You're right. This is not in any particular order, and don't think I took the time to alphabetize, but
That's
the first
right.
player is Kiko Alonso, Alonso.
Kiko Alonso. So you shared with me, and maybe share with the audience, that amazing plane story of his, and then his time, coming from the Saints. I think people really like that one.
Yeah, he was a second round pick, linebacker. Nothing real special about him. He was kind of average size, maybe even undersized, but came out of the gate and just gangbusters and all over the field making plays. And but when you got to know him off the side, he was for those who have seen the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It was as if he was trying to be Spicoli.
Okay.
And sure enough, I'll get to the plane story in a second, but he had the unfortunate incident where he was playing. He went to Oregon, and in the off season, he went back to his campus and played some football, like practice on his own, tore his ACL. And we had this big battle about whether or not it's workers' comp. He wasn't asked to play. The team didn't make him play. But we decided at the very least we were going to pick up his medical expenses. So he called me. He kept calling me to say, is this legit? Is that legit? Kept doing it from the beach in California, and I kept losing him. And finally, I just said, Kiko, keep all your receipts. When you come here for your checkup in April, just give them to me then. So he comes and he's, oh, hey, dude. Oh, hey, yeah, I got something for you. And he puts his arm around me. We go to the locker room, and he goes, I got some, and he dumps his duffel bag. And it's like a softball size thing. And he's like, here are your receipts.
like just in a ball?
In a ball. Yeah. He just dumped.
Oh my God.
Anything by it, but it didn't occur to him that it might be nice
easier
to have.
For you.
I'm a business guy, but yeah, he
was probably proud of himself that he just remembered to keep them all and give them to you.
Exactly. And he did not like flying. That was an understatement. We had to deal with that. I don't, to the point where it was scary. Like we had to place him. We had to have security in a certain place in the plane.
It's something you never think about, right? With a lot of these guys, everybody's like a name on the back of a jersey, a guy underneath a helmet, a fantasy football player. Like these are real human beings, like we've talked about before.
Exactly. You've been on that charter, Josh, and I'll guarantee there were at least a handful of guys that you were looking at and they were acting cool, but they were terrified.
Yeah, it is amazing. That's a good one to start off there, buddy. Good job. All right, I'm gonna hit you with an easy one. We're gonna go.
Wait, you're hitting me?
Well, not hit you, but I'm just going to throw somebody out here. I'm somebody out. I'm going to go with Bryce Paup. Bryce Paup, NFL Defensive Player of the Year in 1995. Give me some Bryce Paup.
Well, I'm going to throw this back at you a little bit because you were there for Bryce Paup's tenure. You were in the building, but my recollection of him was that I didn't know him. He wasn't on my radar up until the year before. And he had like one of those breakout seasons with the Packers, and Chris Berman, every time he said his name when he got, 15 sacks or whatever in the highlights with Green Bay, was like Bryce Paup, he's just, it was like, okay, hard to forget. And then it was a big splash to pick him up at free agency, and never had seen the guy. Again, no internet. You don't have these visuals, but he came in and you're expecting a guy, that comes in and signs a contract like that, a huge free agent splash, to have some swagger to him.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
He did not.
You would have had no idea this guy. He was like the AP Defensive Player of the Year in 95. Yeah. And he just carried himself like a regular dude. Yeah. Just like, one of the best, maybe the best free agent pickup in Bills history. It could be argued, right?
When you say who is it, he's the first name that comes to mind. Yes.
And he absolutely did not carry himself in that way, any shape, way, shape, or form. I was always surprised at how, humble and just how kind of uninteresting he was in an interesting way, if that makes sense.
You stole a line I had for a player later, but
aren't
good stuff. But you're right. That's what you saw from him was my interpretation too. Yes.
All right, you're up next.
I am. Okay. Going back to my intern year,
Okay.
player was Rob Riddick.
Oh, yeah.
And
Third down specialist, right?
there you go. There you go. So I was new to the team. I was not a fan of the team. I was just so thrilled to be in the NFL. But we get there, and Thurman Thomas was a rookie, and he had a good rookie season. I think he had 800 yards or whatever. He was going to be the future. No one knew, like, the next year how he would just explode and be a superstar. But Rob Riddick was a guy that hard-nosed running back, but it was funny to be in the building around these guys. And between practices, I would always see him, and he was smoking a cigarette. And it just blew my
wow.
I was thinking every NFL player was like Bruce Jenner eating their Wheaties, and you just turn around and he's, hey dude, how you doing? And it's just,
is he the only guy that you ever remember smoking cigarettes? I should say cigarettes. I should specify cigarettes.
Cigarette. There might have been a couple others, and they were way back then during his year. But
you're right. That would be really jarring.
It was weird.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right. That would be real. I mean, it's kind of jarring to see people smoke now because it's just so kind of out of society's norms. But to see an NFL player, it's like Larry Bird used to like polish off a 6 or 12 pack after a game, right? Like back in the 80s. Things were just so different.
He's been coming up on my Facebook feed, and I hated Larry Bird, and I know Josh. I was a Sixer fan, and oh my gosh, he just terrorized the Sixers. But he may be the nastiest, best. Yeah, I mean Jordan, whatever. Sure. That's another conversation.
Wow.
I have a deep respect for but Rob Riddick, the smoking is crazy.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. The next one on my list is somebody who I mentioned in show 1. My guy Karl Mock, but I'm going to tell a different Karl Mock story. So I was going to do the part 2 of the whiteboard whale shit story for those of you who might have missed it. So, this happens in March, and, I'm there every single day after that. And Coach Mock decided that he just wasn't going to speak to me. And the hallways in the old administration and then the new administration building, they weren't that wide. And, I was probably 4 offices away from him, and I crossed paths with him once, twice a day. Always say, hey, coach, how you doing? Not one word. I mean, like it was like I was not even there.
It was eye contact?
He did not acknowledge my presence. He didn't even care enough to ignore me, to show me he's ignoring me. It's like I was not there. So this went on until the start of training camp. And I'll never forget, he had a collection of hats. He had some friend that was a hat designer or whatever. I don't know. He made all these, logoed Bills hats. And quite frankly, they were bootleg. They were not licensed. Mm. And he was handing them out to the coaching staff and some of the scouting guys and whatever else. He was really proud of these hats. And he comes up to me. He goes, hey, honest to God, the first utterance that he had given me since the whale shit back in March. This is August or end of July. I'm like, hey, coach. He's like, what size hat are you? And now I hadn't been asked that question maybe ever in my life. And I'm like, I think I'm like a 7 3/4. He's like, Jesus Christ, you got a big head. He takes the hat, he throws at me. He goes, this is yours. That was it. That's all he said. That's all he said.
It was progress, I guess.
That was when I knew I had arrived with Coach Karl Mock. You're next. Go ahead.
No, I just got to recap that. So you weren't even worth being ignored, but then you got a grunt and an insult. That is progress.
And I got swag thrown at me. Yep, that's exactly what happened. Yeah, you're next.
All right, I'm gonna go with Richie Incognito.
Okay.
I had 2 tenures with him. In 2009, we had a rash of injuries on the O-line, and we had 3 games left, and we were, I think, here we go again in the hunt, but had to win 3. Somebody else had to lose 3, whatever. They didn't mean nothing, but we bring them in, and Paul Lancaster, the director of player engagement, says to me, the players would always come to me eventually on their first or second day to find out how they got paid. And he's like, hey, I got Tommy Boy coming at you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he hangs up and kind of giggles. And all of a sudden, this massive figure darkens my door. And it was just like Farley on, but
Yeah.
chiseled, huge guy. But I heard in his first game, guys that were, I was on the field a little bit pregame, but I usually just went right to the booth, and guys that were, my colleagues that were on the field, they would come up and they were like, "Oh my gosh, this Richie Incognito dude!" Like, no one knew him then. He was a rookie, and was traded from St. Louis to us. He's like, he came screaming out of the tunnel by himself and just had this crazed look in his eyes. And we were playing the Patriots, I think, and all the Patriots guys were like, "Oh my gosh, who is that? What is that?" We have to deal with something. And he kept up that energy for the entire game.
How was he in the office? Like when he walked into your door?
Oh, absolutely. The opposite. Just
sweetheart.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Those he had this on and off switch that, apparently when it came to game time, it was on. And when it was not, he was just, like any other person.
That's really funny. All right. So my next guy on the list was the GM of the Bills, the late great John Butler. So I got tasked with holding the whiteboard during practice. So long story short, Joe Pendry would call the play to the offense, and I would take a giant whiteboard, balance it on my knee, and I would have to write the play in a Sharpie, turn around to the video guys and flash the large size whiteboard so that they could cut that up for the film session after practice, and it would be play on the whiteboard, then play. Now I'm sure it's way more automated than that.
You're that Josh?
I'm that Josh. Yes, Henry, the video guy, remembered me as that Josh. He hated doing that, and it was a real pain in the neck for them. So I got tasked with doing that. Now I was never in any offensive meetings. I did not have the offensive playbook. I was trying to learn things basically by osmosis. It didn't really matter whether I knew it or not, but I was just taking the play call, writing it very quickly on the whiteboard, turning to the cameras, trying to get it on the cameras, et cetera, et cetera. Well, John Butler decided that, he'd sit in the back of the bus in the middle. I'm sure you know this, in the middle, like where the aisles split and the very back of the bus, anytime you're on the road. He would sit there, Jim Overdorf would sit there, almost like the principal or the final boss in the back of the bus. Mm-hmm. And he always got a kick out of testing me as to how much of the offense I had picked up and what I understood about it. Now, mind you, this is not my job. I am not well-versed in Joe Pendry's fairly complex offense. But I would board the team bus, going to the stadium, coming from, whenever, or he'd see me at camp. He'd see me during practice, and he'd pull me to the side. Hey, what's Bob? What's 32 Bob? Which hole do you hit? Putting me on the spot. And again, this man is like 6'5", ex-Marine, chain smoker, has a voice like he swallowed 25 rocks, and he's like your boss.
Intimidating.
He scared the shit out of me as a 23-year-old.
You're not just
and
you.
He knew it. And of course, and he knew it. And he never said or did anything wrong, but he just used his gravitas and his presence, and he would put me on the spot. And if I got it right, he'd say nothing. And if I got it wrong, he'd just not berate me, but he would belittle me in front of every single person who was around. And of course, his Robin over there, Jim Overdorf, would laugh and think it was the funniest thing ever. So God rest his soul. He was nice to me, like Mr. Butler, which we called him. But boy, he put the fear of God in me, not only just as it was his physical presence, but when he would quiz me on an offense that I was not tasked to learn, that was always terrifying.
Yeah, you described him perfectly. That's hysterical. And he would, real quick, every year when preseason, we'd take more staff, interns and, 90 versus 53. And so extra strength guys or whatever. And he would look for like raw meat,
yes,
an intern that would be easily intimidated, which most everyone would be by him. But they would get to the plane just when they were getting ready to board up the stairs, and someone would say to him, "Hey, you got your boarding pass, right?" And the kid would be like, "No, I know." And he's like, "Well, it was left on your desk yesterday afternoon." And they're like, oh no. And then so they would get Bill Bamback, the director of security, who was in on it, of course.
Sure.
And he's like, all right, son, come with me. And he would take him right to John Butler and say, yeah, young Rob here doesn't have his boarding pass. And he goes,
Terror.
Yeah, son, don't you know this is the NFL?
Yeah.
You got to prepare. Again, there was no board. It was, and he's like, all right, well, you're here, so you're going to go through with the game anyway. Now, mind you, of course, all these interns are hopeful of maybe ultimately,
of course,
either being employed by the team or the league at least. And so John Butler would say, well, just stick with Mr. Bamback here. And Bill Bamback would say, stay right with me, walk right up the stairs, don't make eye contact with anyone. And and then they wouldn't even tell him that it was a joke until like never. Someone else would finally say, oh, they got you on the boarding pass thing, right? And I'm like,
yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And he could play it. He could play it so well. John Butler. So I got to follow up to a name you just mentioned, but you're up next.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Troy Vincent, and he came to the Bills in 05 or 06. He'd been with the Dolphins, really good DB, but he came with the title of being the league player
rep,
association rep, yeah, and he played that card, and to the point where Mr. Wilson wanted to learn everything that Troy would know about being the player rep, and took him to lunch every day. And so Troy, my office was right next to Mr. Wilson, so I would see that he had found favor with him, and so Troy would come to me knowing that I was supposed to be the person handling per diems and whether a guy gets paid if he's cut on a Tuesday during a week or not, and he would quiz me in the cafeteria. And kind of the way you got called out by John Butler. He was, hey, and yeah, in the article section of the CBA it says this.
What a nightmare.
Oh, and it was. And so it made me really study the CBA more. I was only responsible for certain parts of it, but but he would kind of wink, and I ran. Was it
in a joke? It was in a joking manner, right?
Mostly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He still wanted to know because, players knew that he was that guy. So they would come to him with all these questions. He's like, well, let me find out. It was me that had yeah. So,
boy, lucky you.
Yeah,
lucky
it wasn't
you there.
Fun, but yeah, it worked out okay.
Right. All right. I got another one. This is a follow-up to our guy Woody that was on last week on our show. If you didn't see that episode, it was really fun with former assistant equipment manager Randy Woody Ribick. His boss at the time, Dave Hojanowski, another one in the theme of being ribbed and being hazed in the NFL. Very first preseason game was in Detroit, okay, at the Silverdome, which smelled like popcorn the entire time. So really excited, get there. First preseason game on the road. Oh my God, this is amazing. The game happens. Everything goes smoothly. We're leaving the Silverdome tunnel. I don't know if you remember the Silverdome, a tunnel similar to Highmark Stadium. Okay. So you have to go down. The buses kind of go in, but then it's a dome. So you have to, it's pressurized. So you have to walk through the doors, and then there was like a revolving door.
I have to look that up because I was in their new stadium many, many times. I don't know that I was ever in the
Silverdome. You were there in Detroit.
Was
That's
I?
when we had
Okay, then I was. I'm sorry.
So it was a tunnel.
All right, then I was there. Yeah.
It was a tunnel like Highmark, but inside an inflatable dome. And now I had never been in one of those domes before. I had never been in the Carrier Dome, the Hoosier Dome, the Metro Dome. I had never been in one of those. So we're on the way out, and we're all walking through, and Hoach goes, you know what? Can you do me a favor? Can you run ahead? Because he had some equipment in his hand. Can you run ahead, and can you open the door for me? Now, I had seen everybody else go through the carousel door. He's like, can you just open the door for me? I'm like, yeah, sure, Hoach. Well, of course, John Butler's there. Bill Bamback's there. A bunch of guys are there, and they all know what's coming. And idiot me at 23, sure, I'd love to do it. I run up to the door. I open the door. I got sucked out that door, and I went flying I lost my feet, and you're on an incline, okay? So I lost my feet, and I rolled a little bit down the hill because it is pressurized, and I got sucked right out the door. And of course, they're all standing there. It's hilarious. Objectively, it's hilarious. They all knew it was coming. There was a few players, like everybody saw it well ahead of time, and I'm sure as I was walking towards the door, they were doing snap over the fingers. Hey, look at this guy here. I got sucked right. My only experience of ever leaving the Silverdome was on my ass.
Yeah, that's a great story.
You're up next.
No, I when I was young and lived in the Adirondacks, and we used to go to a bunch of high school friends. We used to go to one Syracuse game a year at the Carrier Dome.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing. And one year, my friend Rich Hosley had broken his leg. He was on crutches, and he still went. And he was at the door. It was a revolving door, and he got sucked out. And it was just like a garage sale. The crutches were tumbling over his legs and everything.
I had no idea. And you're there to, like you said, you're there to impress. Sure, anything you need. And I thought I was doing a good thing, and I got thrown out that door.
Yeah. Wow. So they took another one for their entertainment. I like your snapping thing. They were like, here.
Oh yeah. Oh, they were like, yeah. Hey, look at this guy. Come. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. Who do you got next?
All right. Well, I was gonna have this as a 1-1A situation, but I made them two different people. But the next one is Ross Tucker. Okay. Fans may or may not know, Bills fans, that he actually played a couple of years with the Bills. One year he was off and on practice squad or whatever, but another year he was on the regular roster, 53, played in regular season games, and he was from Princeton. And I understood why Troy Vincent grilled me with all those CBA questions. But when Troy left, and I'm okay, but then Ross Tucker comes, and somehow out of left field, he does all of the same things, asks me the same questions, but there was nothing to gain for him other than knowledge. But he was just a guy. If you hear Ross on the radio or TV, he just wants to learn stuff. And part of it was he had been, picked up and cut on a Tuesday, brought back on a Wednesday. And depending on what time you're cut on a Tuesday, you're supposed to get paid for the whole week, which it makes, it
Sure.
makes a difference for those guys, especially if you don't know if you're going to be there the following week. But, he just, every time I saw him in the hallway, he would grill me with the same kind of questions. And so when I hear him on the radio these days, I just want to wink and nod, and I'm like, yep, I know whatever you're saying to the audience, Ross, you did your homework.
Do you take 1% credit for his knowledge of the NFL? Are you
1%? 1%? Yeah, I'll take what's the over and under? Yeah, I would go 1. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good one.
I could creep up near 2% on it, I think.
I like it. All right, my next one is one of the largest human beings I've ever met, and ironically, one of the nicest people that I met when I was there. And my interactions with him started before I was promoted. Ted Washington and his lovely wife, Verlisa. Hopefully they're doing well. So Verlisa was a huge fan of the merchandise department, and Ted did a bunch of charities and giveaways. So we got to know his wife very well. Yeah. And I would have to deliver merchandise to Ted in the locker room to take back home to Verlisa. Now, this is like when I was an intern. So, I would go over there and I'd have a stack of his jerseys or footballs or whatever that he'd have to sign to then get home to his wife for whatever charities, whatever. Don, I'm telling you, every time. Now, he damn well knew that these things were coming. He knew who they were coming from. Okay. Every time I went in the locker room, oh God. No. This man is like 6'5" and like 115 pounds. Like he was like over 400 pounds. I'm convinced.
Yeah.
Anytime I would walk in the locker room with his stuff, and of course he knew I was coming there that day with his stuff because Verlisa would tell him, he would make a complete scene about me in the locker room. Oh, nah, you again? What do you want? Trying to hit me up for more free shit? Like, what do you want? And I'm like, oh, Ted. I'm like, Ted, you know what I'm doing here. Here are the footballs. I'm handing them to him because we're in the field house. Our stock room was in the field house. He would take his hand, Don. He would take his one hand and he would put it around the back of my neck. And his hands were so big that his thumb, now I was a little thinner, his thumb and his middle finger could completely go around my neck, and he could touch the tip of his thumb and the tip of his middle finger on both sides of my neck. He literally could have crushed my neck with one hand every single time I went there. So, ironically enough, I get promoted. And the first time he sees me in the locker room, now it's like for camp. Yeah. And he's like, oh, and I'm like, no, Ted. I'm like, no more. I'm like, I'm now on your level. Of course I wasn't on his level. But I'm like, I'm not in merchandise anymore. I'm like, I'm done with that. He goes, all right. He's like, cool. He's like, I won't try to choke you anymore. And we were good. We were good from then on.
Wow. When you crossed the Rubicon there, he wasn't going to try to kill you anymore.
I stood up to a large human being. It was always in jest and always in fun. And he was a super nice man. But good Lord, I hate – and the thing is, it was a long walk or golf cart ride over from the field house to the locker room, knowing I was going to do this because I'm like, oh, God, I'm going to get embarrassed in the locker room by the largest human being I know. Great.
Yeah, because as far as anyone else knows there, you really are doing whatever he's accusing you of doing.
Oh, people have no idea what I'm doing. Right. Absolutely. and everyone's going to take his side. He's an all-pro, and I'm a nothing. Yeah.
You might have
we got time
to have invoked his wife's name a little more. That might have helped.
I wasn't bringing up his wife's name in the locker room. He might have really crushed me then.
Okay.
We got time. True. We got time for a couple more here.
A couple more. Okay. Real quick. Is this like 2-minute warning kind of stuff?
Not yet, but we got about 5, 6, 7 minutes.
All right. I'll rattle off a couple here. Glenn Parker, one of the smartest guys, to ever come through, offensive lineman in the 90s. But he was a political guy, and you could not, put him in a box, red or blue. He was a libertarian that, he wanted government should have nothing to do with your life. But then again, on the social side, you would be considered kind of liberal these days. And, that includes drugs and everything. But he was anytime he had a chance to, someone would say something, hey, nice day today. Well, and
everything was political.
Well, but in a way that you couldn't like box him in, and it was just a clever kind of guy. And you kind of stole a line that I had earlier about someone being interesting for not being interesting. And when we signed Terrell Owens in 2009. I mean, it was coming off the heels of all of that, the push-ups in his yard and all of his antics. And when the season was over, I had so many people say, so what's T.O. like? What's T.O. like? I couldn't come up with a single story because he was super respectful. He was just on his best behavior. And there wasn't one thing that I could ever tell someone that I, in conversations with him or whatever, that came close to, upholding their view of him as this super character in the NFL. So
that's interesting. That's because, you're right. Like T.O. is larger than life in every single way possible. Yep. So he was just kind of, he kind of put his head down, right? Was that his last chance in the NFL at that point?
He ended up going somewhere after that, but
I'm think saying if he would have had a disastrous stint in Buffalo, would that
maybe so. But he had like 900 yards.
Yeah.
Maybe
because it almost felt like, hey, I'm coming to Buffalo because I have nowhere else to go. Like in 2009, right?
Yeah, and they didn't even have a quarterback, but he quickly, answered the question. Maybe the most controversial thing he ever did was like, who should be the starting quarterback? Because it was still Trent Edwards, somebody else, and Fitz. He was like, well, Fitz, of course, and which, but it was that was he was just on his best behavior.
That's interesting.
Had nothing, for friends. I disappointed him so much. My friends.
Yeah. Well, hey, sometimes there's nothing to say.
Right.
Sometimes there's nothing to say. I'm gonna end, and then I'll end with one more. And this is a name that you and I have talked about a couple times on the show. She hasn't gotten much love from our show. Ralph Wilson's daughter, Christy. Who was your boss and my boss. I bet you're a little nervous about what I'm going to say right now.
A little bit, yeah.
So she, meeting her was interesting. Finding out that she, ran the department from Florida was obviously interesting as well. But my favorite memory of the owner's daughter, we were at dinner at Billy Ogden's,
Mhm.
where she would take our entire department, very graciously take us out to dinner right
And
around
our
the holidays.
wives, very nice.
And our
or
wives and
significant
girlfriends,
others,
whatever.
yep.
Yeah. And we're sitting there, and I started telling her, about me as a kid and loving the Bills, and I was at the 51-3, game against the Raiders, and she stopped me. You probably remember this. She stopped me mid-sentence. Oh, I remember that game, and I'm thinking she's going to be like, oh yeah, that's the game we went to the Super Bowl, and oh my God, the Gulf War, and 51-3. She's Al Davis. I'm like, oh. She's like, what? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, oh, Al Davis. He was just wearing all this chapstick and all of this white stuff around his mouth. And he just came up to me and he's like, hi, Christy. And he wanted to give me a hug and give me a kiss. She's like, just don't kiss me, Al. Just don't kiss me. And
Get away from me.
A, the story was amazing. But B,
Yeah.
I just never thought that we'd go from talking about, anybody else basically on the planet that you mentioned, the 51-3 game, would talk about going to the Super Bowl or maybe the Gulf War or, maybe something related to, the Bills going to the Super Bowl for the first time. Well, not Christy Wilson. She talked about how she had to avoid over chapsticked Al Davis giving her a kiss before the game started, which I thought was just utterly amazing.
Yeah, it just shows it was almost like Uncle Al, right? He was great friends with her dad and the Hunt and all. They were all just this little group of guys.
She was horrified by him. And she wasn't a kid, she was a woman, and
That's a great
she was
story.
just utterly horrified. Do you remember her saying that? Don't kiss me, Al.
Yes, yeah, get back off. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I remember her telling the story or telling you the story and
stopped me mid-sentence of 51-3, and I thought, oh man, I'm going to get some great nugget about the locker room after the game or something about the Super Bowl. No, about Al Davis's overchapped lips.
It's so funny because like Al Davis, and when you see him in that setting, he's wearing his white suit. He's got his entourage around him. When he's walking, around, it probably feels like he thinks they're all in slow motion, like, oh yeah. And then all of a sudden he gets to Christy and she does that, and there's like the record scratch sound. Like,
yep. Oh yeah, totally, right back to reality. All right, Don, you have 2 minutes left to give us your either last or a couple final thoughts here.
Oh my gosh, these last two I have are so different. Let me try them.
All right.
If any Bills fan out there, and please, as Josh said at the opening, we were there, we were around these guys, but to some level probably have some memory of these guys. Please chime in and let us know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who we could possibly let you know what we remember about them. But these are on two different ends of the spectrum. Any fan that knows this guy, congratulations. But it was a tight end named Rod Trafford. He might have played 3 games, regular season games, but he was the ultimate. I talked about Spicoli before. This guy was the personification of that. And I remember he came up to the office one time, and Joni Graham, who said, "Oh, hi, Rod. I was just looking at your bio." I think she said, "Congratulations for making the team." He was like, "Oh, thanks. I see you're from Trenton, New Jersey." He was like, "Oh no, I'm like 15 minutes from there."
Oh dear.
Just we're like, okay, you're close enough, right? It's a big metropolitan area, but this other one is again on the opposite. It's Thurman Thomas, and man, chime in, Josh, but he was the most confident player that I was ever around. Like 200-yard games, making the hey, nice job. He just acted like, of course I did that.
Yes,
but somehow it wasn't cocky. It was,
but it was chip on your shoulder.
He just expected to make those plays.
Right. I was dared $100 to call him Squatty in the locker room. I wouldn't have. Because you're right. He was short in stature, obviously, but he had almost the biggest personality in some ways. He carried himself like he was a superstar, rightfully so. Of course he should.
He was.
And he was intimidating without being like aggressive about it, and he was cocky without being arrogant.
Perfectly said. Yeah, I mean, with Jim and Bruce and those guys, Thurman was the guy that just
and
he knew he was great.
Not a surprise that he's the one that stood up to Jim Kelly with the Pickering Bills.
There you go.
You know, please, everyone, like and subscribe to If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo and the Overreaction Network. We will be back next week with more stories and memories and maybe a fun guest. Don, thanks a lot for today.
Stay interesting, my friends.